The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered today by our chaplain, Father Coughlin.
With the psalmist we pray. Those who put their trust in you, Lord God, are like the mountains that cannot be shaken. They seem to absorb all the turmoil and controversy. They stand tall and strong forever. Just as the mountains, as well as the depths of the seacoast, surround this nation, so, Lord, your love holds your people now and forever. You will not allow the power of lies and half-truths to dominate the air breathed in by the just, nor will you allow fear to paralyze their hands when it comes to defending what is right. Do good, Lord, for those who seek the common good and are open-hearted. Drive away those who are so deceived they create only indecision and dissension among the virtuous. Give us peace, Lord, now and forever. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof, and pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan rise?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1, Rule 1, I would ask for a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal.
Questions on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal? Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The journal is approved.
Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan rise?
On that, I would ask for the ayes and nays.
Pursuant to the ayes and nays are requested. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pledge of allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Rhode Island.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 one-minute requests on each side. The gentleman from Texas rise.
Request permission to address the House in 1 minute, Mr. Speaker, and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, members, ignoring the facts, the experts, political reality, and the best interests of the American people, the Republican leadership continues to embrace a spending plan already rejected by the Senate that would destroy 700,000 jobs and derail the economic recovery. The Republican spending plan is a doctrine of misplaced priorities. They want to lay off teachers, cut Pell Grants, slash programs for homeless veterans, and reduce Head Start, among other short-sighted and harmful cuts. Incomes and consumer spending increased in February, helping to expand the nation's economy. First-time jobless claims decreased by 5,000 a week. The total number of people receiving benefits fell to the lowest level in 3 years, due in part to increased hiring. The February jobs reports show a gain of 192,000 jobs, significant employment increase that marks the 12th straight month of private sector growth, and a drop in the unemployment rate to 8.9%, the lowest level in almost 2 years. Let's don't hurt our fragile recovery by the Republican majority shutting down the government.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise? The gentleman is recognized.
We are in the midst of a foreign policy and constitutional crisis. The administration has committed our nation to a war against Libya in violation of the Constitution of the United States. The administration has said they do not have full information about the rebels they are assisting. But it is clear that for the last 30 years, U.S. intelligence has had a relationship with prominent elements within the Libyan opposition. Further, the New York Times today reports that elements of the opposition may be linked to al-Qaeda and that we are considering arming them. When it comes to the war in Libya, the administration has subverted Congress and the United States Constitution. Tomorrow I will present to Congress a definitive one-hour response to the administration's Libyan war in the form of facts and questions. Congress must challenge violations of our constitutional principles relating to war and peace. The critical issue today is not the defense of Libyan democracy, but the defense of American democracy.
For what purpose is the gentleman from Rhode Island rise? Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize and honor the Providence Veterans Affairs Medical Center for their outstanding service to the heroic men and women who serve in our armed forces. The Providence VA Medical Center is an award-winning healthcare facility in Rhode Island, providing personalized outpatient and inpatient healthcare to our veterans. Recently, the Providence VA received the National Center for Patient Safety 2010 Cornerstone Recognition Program Bronze Award for successfully providing high-quality healthcare services to our veterans. The men and women who serve in the armed forces put their lives on the line every day to protect the freedoms that we enjoy here at home. We owe our troops, veterans, and their families our utmost gratitude and respect, and in addition to exceptional medical care for their great sacrifices on our behalf. I commend the Providence VA Medical Center for their excellent service to our veterans. Congratulations on your achievements, and thank you for your commitment to Rhode Island's veterans. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Massachusetts rise? Gentlelady's recognized.
Madam Speaker, last year I heard from a single father from Haverhill, Massachusetts, who put his life savings into purchasing a home. After a reduction in his salary forced him to modify his mortgage, his servicer stopped returning his phone calls, lost his documents, and refused to provide him with any information to help him modify his loan. He wrote to me saying, quote, "My bank told me that they had not received the application documents I had sent at the beginning of the modification process. It was ridiculous, as I have the original documents on file with the fax receipt. Nonetheless, I faxed everything again. Over the course of an entire year, he called and resent his documents, speaking with multiple people, none of whom could give him an answer or even find that he had a modification in place. This story represents just one of the many that I have heard from constituents. We should be doing far more to ensure that these lenders are playing by the rules. Instead, my Republican colleagues have sought to terminate every step taken by the federal government to help homeowners like my constituent, leaving them at the mercy of unscrupulous lenders such as these. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise? Gentlelady's recognized.
Madam Speaker, in the past few weeks, we have seen the devastating images of the massive earthquake and tsunami in Japan. As someone who lived in Japan, it's hard to believe entire towns and cities in this beautiful country have been destroyed. And I'm heartsick for the more than 9,800 lives that have been lost. I can only imagine the grief and shock felt by the families and friends of the victims, and my heart goes out to them. I'm grateful that San Diego's own USS Reagan departed for Japan on March 11th to help with relief efforts. With the more than 17,500 people still missing and more than 245,000 people in evacuation centers, daunting challenges lie ahead. Madam Speaker, I urge this body to stand in solidarity with the Japanese people and reassure our ally that America is ready and committed to giving our partner the support needed to cope with this horrible disaster.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, America's broken immigration system continues to have havoc in communities across the country. Real families with real children live in fear that someone they love may be torn away from them. No child deserves to grow up without love of their parents. We must bring an end to the separation of families. We must all remember that immigrants are not our enemies. They are our neighbors, our classmates, our fellow churchgoers. They are part of the American fabric. Over the coming month, I look forward to working with CHC and advocates across the nation to speak on the human impact, I state, on the human impact of our broken immigration system. Immigration is not just a Latino issue. It's an American issue that impacts all of us. Let's work together to stop this hateful rhetoric and pass real immigration reform. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to promote early childhood programs, which are investments not only in our children, but in our country's future. In 1990, the Child Care and Development Block Grant was created for low-income parents who are either working or in school. If the proposed cuts to Child Care and Development Block Grants are signed into law, 150,000 families nationwide will lose child care subsidies. In my home state, the annual cost for child care for an infant can be nearly $12,000 a year, and the annual cost for a toddler can be as much as $9,000. Head Start is another vital service that has provided education, health, nutritional, and social services for 3- and 4-year-olds since 1965. If the cuts proposed in H.R. 1 become reality, 218,220 children nationwide will lose access to Head Start, and approximately 55,000 Head Start employees will lose their jobs. 3,719 children in New Jersey will be left without access to Head Start, and we already have 9,500 children on the waiting list. I ask Congress to continue the debate and support the bill.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio rise? The gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to talk about the loss of jobs and services in America. So far, this Republican-controlled Congress has had nearly 100 hearings, but not a single one has addressed the real issue in this country, which is jobs. Republican attempts to cut more than 50% of funding for Head Start, which will affect more than 200,000 children, and their proposal to cut 62% from community development block grants have hurt our communities. They are depriving hard-working Americans of services they need. According to the latest Bloomberg national poll, when given 5 choices of the most important issues facing this nation, 43% of all Americans picked unemployment and jobs as number 1. Reducing the deficit and spending came in a distant second at 29%. Madam Speaker, the American people want leadership that will create jobs and jumpstart our nation's economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to recognize the members of the Seroptimus International San Ramon Valley for their work to improve the lives of women in our community. This is the final week of the Women's History Month, and as such, it is fitting that we recognize an organization that's helping the next generation of women to succeed and make history. The Seroptimus of San Ramon Valley recently held a conference for the 7th year in a row to help young women gain self-confidence and develop important life skills. The event included presentations from speakers and interactive workshops that promote leadership and help the participants to pursue their life's goals. The Seroptimus of San Ramon Valley, which is one of many chapters of the Seroptimus International throughout the world, also issue awards to girls who are involved in community service and provide grants to women so they can participate in job training and education programs. The Seroptimus of San Ramon Valley have made a difference for many in our community. I ask my colleagues to join me in recognizing the members of this organization for their hard work to improve the lives of women.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This week I plan to introduce a bill that will allow states to submit 3 statues for display in the United States Capitol. This bill seeks to include more diversity among the honored in our Capitol by increasing that number of statues to include more notable women, minorities, and other ethnic groups that contributed significantly to our history. Currently, there are 100 statues on display given by the states, and only 16 are women or minority groups. 10 are women, and 3 are Native Americans. 3 statues are Native American males, 2 are Hispanic, and 1 is a Pacific Islander. Although there have been many noteworthy African American and Asian Americans in our history, no state has submitted a statue honoring one of them. This disparity must be rectified. If you walked through the Capitol and looked at the statues, you'd think all the heroes and leaders were granite white men. This bill is to express the equal representation of all Americans is essential in our historical perspectives and the educational value the Capitol offers its thousands of visitors. I urge my colleagues to look at the bill, to support it, and have more diverse representation among the statuary in the United States Capitol. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask the American people to wake up. In the malaise of this debate about the deficit and raising the debt ceiling, you have lost your way. Let me just ask you to raise your voices against the issue of a broken government and the potential of a shutdown on the question of what do you want for your children. As we go back to our districts and our school districts and our states, parents are standing in lines at school board meeting crying about 60-seat schools, classrooms, teachers being laid off. Don't you understand that it starts right here in Washington? You need to be speaking to our friends on the other side of the aisle. It's time to invest and grow the economy. It's time to recognize that consumer spending has increased, that jobs have been created, and that it's important to invest in this economy. If you don't get in the way and get in the mix, I can tell you that the rise that we have of 192,000 jobs being created, the unemployment going down, economists saying we should invest now, you're going to lose it. Tied up with those who have views that are only self-centered, our friends that are in the Tea Party, it's time for people to put education first and realize that if you let us fall on the spear here in Washington on the grounds of mislabeled politics and not worry about your children, you're going to lose. Wake up, America. It's time to get in the fight. Fight for your children. Invest and grow the economy now.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii rise? Gentlelady is recognized.
Last week, when most of us were in our respective districts, representatives from community health centers around the country came to Capitol Hill to remind us of the essential role they play in our communities. I hope that the staff of members who voted for H.R. 1, which drastically cuts funding for these very health centers, listened to the stories they heard last week. I've long supported community health centers because in my district, spread over 7 inhabited islands, access to care is a challenge. Although their principal focus has been to provide health care for the underserved, these centers serve people at all income levels. Hawaii's network of community health centers serve nearly 127,000 patients, and only 1/3 of them are Medicaid eligible. On the island of Lanai, 40% of the residents receive care through their community health center. This population, 25% of which are over 65 years of age, can't afford to fly to another island for care. Funding for community health centers is an investment because prevention is more cost-effective than treatment. I urge my colleagues to reject cuts to community health centers. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Wake-up calls. Are we listening? Yes, there are wake-up calls. Can we hear them? This majority in the House has not heeded that wake-up call. They've ignored the investments that we need in a clean energy economy to grow jobs. What are those wake-up calls? Well, there's first the hard-earned American energy consumer dollars. $400 billion plus that go to unfriendly nations that will take those dollars and invest in fighting the American troops while they supply us fossil-based fuels. Then there's the oil spill in the Gulf that wreaked damage on our ecosystem and wrecked the regional economy. Then there was the sticker shock at the pump, at the gas pump, that is driving down the American economy. And no one is listening. Now maybe we will pay attention to the sad announcement today. Last year we dropped to number 3 in clean energy investment after China and Germany. When will we wake up? I say today the President talks to us about the energy security in our economy, that we need to reduce oil imports and innovate into a clean energy future. We need to heed that clarion call. It is a wake-up call necessary. The America I know and love is number 1. It should never be 3 on the list of clean energy investment. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Advise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, California's governor will soon declare an end to the drought that has devastated the San Joaquin Valley. Our cities are flooding and our rivers are raging, and the snowpack in the Sierras are deeper than they've been in any 15-year period. It's clear that the drought is over. Somehow, though, Washington hasn't gotten the news. With unemployment still in double digits in 7 counties in the Valley, and unemployment continuing to be very problematic, the folks in Washington think that communities can recover from the Great Recession with just over half the water our farmers need. They don't understand the Valley. They don't understand us. Do you hear me, Commerce Department? Do you hear me, Secretary Lott? Water is the lifeblood of the San Joaquin Valley. It puts food on our tables, sustains our economy, and creates good jobs. And that's why I'm introducing legislation that will allow the needed flexibility for California water policy. As we work to find short-term and long-term solutions to California's broken water system, passing common-sense legislation will bring over 500,000 acre-feet of water to Valley farmers and farm communities. It's time to put aside our political differences. It's time to reach a compromise, and it's time to end this regulatory drought. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut rise?
Address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a few hours ago, fiscal and public health safety and sanity prevailed when the Food and Drug Administration clarified an order on February 3rd approving the drug Makena, which is a injectable medication for women at risk of preterm birth, one of the biggest health care challenges that our country faces. There are 500,000 premature births in this country. They cost the health care system $29 billion, the leading cause of infant mortality. This new medication, which the FDA approved on February 3rd, is promising, but it costs $1,500 per injection, $30,000 per pregnancy. At the same time, OBGYNs in this country have been prescribing a compound alternative that costs only $20 per treatment, per medication, and yet the order on February 3rd indicated that there would only be exclusive treatments under the $1,500 medication. The order this morning clarifies that there will be no exclusivity, that OBGYNs will continue to be able to prescribe the cheaper alternative, but FDA retained its power to still require exclusivity. For the sake of taxpayers and patients, Congress must keep a close eye on the FDA to not take away this option to OBGYNs all across America. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. Purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 186 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 21, House Resolution 186. Resolved, that upon the adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill, H.R. 471, to reauthorize the D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The amendment recommended by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted. The bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill, as amended, are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill, as amended, and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion, except 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. 2, the further amendment printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, if offered by Delegate Norton of the District of Columbia or her designee, which shall be in order without intervention of any point of order, shall be considered as read, and shall be separately debatable for 40 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent. And 3, one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 hour.
Madam Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only, and I also ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days during which they may revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
This resolution provides for a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 471, the Scholarships for Opportunity and Result Act, sometimes called the SOAR Act, with 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chairman and the ranking minority member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Further, this proposed rule will make in order all the amendments filed in the Rules Committee for H.R. 471. Okay, admittedly it was only one amendment, but it is made in order, and it is offered by Ms. Holmes Norton of the District of Columbia. It's an amendment that was presented in the committee and defeated on a 12-21 vote, but which will be re-offered here today as a substitute measure. In short, this rule is about as fair as they potentially get. Madam Speaker, this is a very open, it's a straightforward rule that we'll be considering today, and I am pleased to stand before the House in support of this rule, as well as the underlying legislation, H.R. 471. I commend the sponsor of this legislation, the distinguished Speaker of the House, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Boehner, who has previously served as chairman of the Education and Workforce Committee, and he understands education issues very, very well. Madam Speaker, when the Cubs in the 1960s hired Leo DeRocher to be their manager, he was hired 2 years after they'd finished the season 49 games out of first place. And in his short period of time there, he would take them to the top, in which case in 1969, a year that still hurts, the Cubs were atop the National League for 155 days. Unfortunately, 7 of those days they were not on top, included the last day of the season. But DeRocher always said for his team that I make a great effort to argue for the issues, but there are 2 things that are working against me, the umpires and the rules. There will be a lot of people, some people, who will speak against this motion, perhaps even this rule, and there are 2 things against them. One is the unique constitutional relationship between Congress and the District of Columbia that is not there vis-a-vis the states. And number 2, the underprivileged kids who benefit from this underlying bill. If I was to predict a preview of what will be taking place in the debate, not only on the rule but also on the bill itself, I would predict 4 themes will be appearing time after time after time. One will be the concept of the constitutional mandate that is here. When this republic was established, the Constitution gave unique jurisdictional responsibility to Congress over the District of Columbia. That is not going to be a violation of their home rule concept, but it is a responsibility of Congress. And there is great precedent for this particular kind of provision. In 1996, it is Congress that insisted upon a charter school program in the District of Columbia. You will hear from both sides of the aisle recognition of the great value that that program has, and justifiably so. There is a waiting list in the District of Columbia for those charter schools. This underlying bill increases the percentage of funding going to charter schools in the district. 2003, an opportunity scholarship was instituted at the insistence of Congress. Again, there was a waiting list of people wanting the opportunity, disadvantaged kids who wanted the opportunity that this scholarship afforded them. In 2010, and the appropriation bill for 2010, unfortunately, Congress intervened again in a negative way and cut out this opportunity scholarship program. There were a lot of upset students and parents who couldn't believe how special interest politics got in the way of their sons' or daughters' dreams and was snatched from their very hands. Their opportunity to make what they believed were better educational choices basically taken away from them. H.R. 471 remedies this inequity. There were 216 kids at the time scheduled to enter the program who were not allowed because of the action of that particular appropriation bill. Those 216 kids, by this particular legislation, will be given priority in once again being able to apply for this Opportunity Scholarship. Second discussion point that will be coming up repeatedly deals with the efficacy of these programs. There will be conflicting data that will be thrown from both sides as to the effectiveness, but I think the one piece of information that can be clearly stated is that 91% of the kids enrolled in this Opportunity Scholarship complete their coursework. That is 21% higher than a control group of kids who were interested but were not allowed the opportunity of completing this particular program. And that completion rate is almost 32% higher than the regular completion rate of kids in the public education system in Washington, D.C. To quote Dr. Patrick Wolf, who was the lead investigator of the evaluation mandated by Congress of this program, he concluded by stating, "The research evidence and the testimonials of the parents confirm that the District of Columbia is a better place because of the Opportunity Scholarship Program." Third issue that you will be hearing deals with the support of this particular program. There will be dueling statistics that will be coming at you during the course of the debate. Those in favor of the bill will give lists of groups who are in favor of this particular program. Those against the bill will give lists of groups and unions who are opposed to it. Each side will give a list of political leaders, both within Washington, D.C. and outside, who are in favor, and those opposed will give lists of political leaders who do not support this program. There will be poll results that will be given from both sides, most recent of which will be given by Advocates, a Lester and Associate poll, which simply says that 74% of the D.C. residents polled supported this program and wanted it restored and made available to all D.C. students for all their abilities to participate. You will hear polling data to the contrary. You will hear anecdotal stories to the contrary. Perhaps the most telling, though, issue of support deals with the parents and the kids in Washington, D.C. who lined up for this program, who went on waiting lists for the opportunity to become involved in this program, who cried and pled with Congress's past when this program was eliminated. They clearly do not want this program to totally be destroyed because it takes away from them their chance, their option, their opportunity to individualize and upgrade their educational opportunities. This program probably has a philosophical basis, kinship, if you would, with the Pell Grant, GI Bill of Rights, in which, once again, government tried to empower with choices, with few strings attached, individual adult students or parents so they could choose their own personal education future. That's what this bill still tries to do. Final concept that will probably be presented during debate on the rule as well as the bill deals with the concept of liberty. We have a Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. The Revolutionary War was supposedly fought for the purpose of preserving personal liberty. I have to admit, though, as I was teaching school, that it was difficult for my kids there to really comprehend what liberty meant. It was an abstract noun, to say the least. The founders clearly understood what that concept meant as they looked upon a government that was far, far away from them, and in the Declaration of Independence were willing to write that the government far away has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Indeed, that they had waged war against them. Those of us who live in the West today have the Department of Interior to remind us of those same circumstances, but the kids, mainly in urban and rural settings and suburban settings, still have a problem understanding what it means really to have liberty. Until you try and talk about liberty in terms of choices, options, opportunity without the heavy hand of a government official defining what those options and opportunities may or may not be. The entrepreneurial world gets it. They realize if they want a market share, they have to give people choices in their lives. So if I want a mobile phone, there are all sorts of plans from which I may choose. Even in the smallest corner market in Washington, there are still a whole row of breakfast cereals from which I may choose. I may want Pringles potato chips, but they still give me 16 varieties. If indeed Omaha Steak sends me an invitation every week to try and come up with one of their products, and I will choose this week to order one that fits for me. Only in Washington, in this government, do you still have people that truly believe in a one-size-fits-all approach and that mandates can actually be worked. that believe and go back to the concepts of Henry Ford, when the automobile was so unique he could with a straight face look at a consumer and say you can have a car in any color you want as long as it is black. Unfortunately, many of the ideas and philosophies still in government today, indeed some of the programs still in government today, were born in that era in which the idea of an elite sitting in some darkened office would decide what I wanted and what was indeed best for me. That's liberty. The icons who face us in this chamber, all of them were related in some way of moving the concept of law forward, which led to the concept of liberty. This bill is based on that concept of choice, opportunity, and options for people. It deserves our support because it is an opportunity. Call it an education app for Americans living in the District of Columbia, that the most needy and deserving can actually have their choice of how they want their education to take place, and that is done under the sphere of responsibility given to Congress by the Constitution. This bill is worthy of our heritage. It is a symbol of our legacy. One can only assume that the founders, indeed the icons that are looking down from the perch above us, are smiling now, saying Congress doesn't always do it correctly. But this time, with this bill, they got it right. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased today to rise in strong opposition to H.R. 471, the Scholarships for Opportunity and Results Act, also known as the SOAR Act. I also am very pleased that my friend from Utah has, in the tradition of this committee, granted the time to our side. This legislation revives the District of Columbia School Voucher Program, a program that was allowed to expire after 5 years of failing to improve student achievement. My colleague said that there will be statistics on both sides. Doubtless that is true. I also have great respect that the presenter of the rule today is a school teacher. At least if somebody is going to meddle in somebody else's business, they ought to at least know a little bit about what they're talking about. Too many times in too many of our states, too many times in this place, many of us who are not educators, nor have we been involved, are making decisions about the education of folks or children when we should be being a lot more careful. Let me, for example, I'm sure that my colleague who knows his state well, as I know mine, and we know ours, all of us in this institution, I'm sure that he's mindful that in the last 41 years, voters have rejected private school vouchers every time they have been proposed. And interestingly enough, 2 times in Utah, I would urge my good friend. As late as 2007, Utah voted 62% to 38% not to have vouchers. And before that, they didn't just, it was sort of like the District of Columbia. Incidentally, 89% of the people in a referendum in the District of Columbia in 1981 voted against vouchers. But in 88, Utah, 67%. It didn't change very much from that time to 07, which isn't very much time from now. So how dare we come here to tell these people that we are going to thrust upon them something they don't want without a single bit of consultation with a single member of the public officials in this community being consulted. Some might ask why we are here debating such a misguided, narrowly focused measure when violence is raging in the Middle East. Earthquakes and tsunamis have ravaged Japan, and our own nation's economy is kind of like sputtering along. Well, I suppose when it is one of the leadership of the Republican Party's pet issues, the people's work can always be put on hold. This matter is nothing more than a shallow attempt to once again appease the right wing of the Republican Party.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, Congress's oversight of the district is not an excuse for political pandering to the Republicans' special interests of the day. De jure, my colleague used Leo DeRosa. He played with and against Yogi Berra. And Yogi Berra reminds me, if I were to use an analogy, this is deja vu all over again. He and Leo would be proud that we are talking about it, Mr. Bishop. Whether it's gun rights, a woman's right to choose, or education policy, the district is not and should not be the dumping grounds for Republicans' ideological whims. My colleagues have already stripped the district of its limited vote in Congress. The least they could do is allow them to control their education system, just as every other jurisdiction in this country is able to do. The people of the District of Columbia did not ask for or want this program, nor were they, as I have pointed out, or their elected officials consulted. If they had been, I'm sure, the committee would have been told what many of us already know. This program is simply a waste of money. According to legislatively mandated evaluations, the D.C. voucher program failed to show any statistically significant impact on student achievement. This is in contrast to reading and math scores across the district, which did improve over the same period. Though my colleagues claim that this program serves students who would otherwise be stuck in failing schools without the resources to adequately meet their needs, only about a quarter of the students using vouchers came from schools in need of improvement. Additionally, the Department of Education found that students participating in the D.C. voucher program were significantly less likely to attend the school with ESL programs, learning support, and special needs programs, tutors, and counselors. Further, private schools are not required to hold the same level of transparency or accountability as public schools. Rather than directing these funds toward improving all of the district's public and charter schools, as Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton has proposed, this program only serves 1.3% of the 70,000 students enrolled in the D.C. public schools. Though my colleagues may claim to have a newfound commitment to education, my friend from the Rules Committee being an exception, albeit for only a few select students, they have found this commitment. Let's not forget that just a few weeks ago, some in this body and most in the Republican Party were content to cut, and my friend just used the kinship of Pell Grants with this proposal. They proposed to cut federal funding for 9.4 million students, eliminate over 200,000 Head Start placements, do away with supplementary education services for 957,000 underprivileged students. I was just with the CEO of the Urban Leagues of Broward and Palm Beach County in my constituency, and they were talking about how drastic this is going to affect the constituency in that area of underprivileged students, and who they are seeing and what the juvenile justice system is now reaping from this ill harvest that we thrust upon these people. Reduce or get rid of, they said, after-school programs for 139,000 students across this nation. On the one hand, Republicans go about the need for fiscal discipline. They refuse to negotiate on legislation to keep the government operating and propose billions of dollars in cuts to our nation's students. Yet they are perfectly willing to throw millions of dollars at a program that has proven year after year to be unpopular, inefficient, and downright ineffective. If my colleagues truly wanted to improve the district's schools, along with the schools across the nation, they will be bringing forth a measure seriously to reform the No Child Left Behind provision. But no, instead we're debating a measure that has no hope of becoming law, simply to appease the political whims of a few in the Republican Party. The American people, in my view, are tired of the majority using this institution to do nothing but spew ideological rhetoric. Madam Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I'm going to offer an amendment to the rule to provide that immediately after the House adopts this rule, it will bring up H.R. 639, the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act, and I'm mindful that there will be speakers regarding same. The amendment will provide our government the tools to rein in unfair currency policies by the Chinese. I'm going to, at this time, reserve any further comments that I have after the following statement. It has been 13 weeks and still no jobs bill and no substantive plan to improve our nation's economy. When my friends in the majority are ready to get down to the serious business of improving the lives of all American people, we'll be waiting. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Utah.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity of being here, and I also appreciate being on here with my good friend from Florida, Mr. Hastings, who is one of the true delights with whom I have the opportunity to work here in Washington. I guess if he is saying that we have the group du jour from whom we are presenting bills, today's group du jour would be those who are financially disadvantaged and still want a better opportunity for education. As I said, there would be 4 issues that would be discussed. We can check off 3 of the 4 already. Only the concept of liberty has yet to be addressed here. Some of them may be non sequitur, but they were still there nonetheless. And I guess the last statistic that still can be put out there as to whether this program works or not deals with the parents who, when the free market of ideas was opened up to them, they chose this program. They wanted this program. They wanted to maintain this program, and they will flock back to it. Since my good friend Mr. Hastings also used a baseball reference to time me, I have to one-up him one more time. In the words of the great Satchel Paige, who was consulting a struggling pitcher who was failing to get it over on the corners, he just said, throw the pitch. Just throw strikes. Home plate, don't move. This program is one of those strikes. All we need to do is throw it. Home plate, don't move. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah reserves the balance
Before
of his time.
yielding, I'll one-up the one-upper. Satchel Paige also said, don't look back. I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to my distinguished friend and colleague from the Rules Committee from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. This bill, the SOAR Act, reestablishes a program to send D.C. students to private elementary and secondary schools. The main issue that I struggle with, that this body needs to struggle with regard to this measure, is the justification for pushing federal will onto Washington, D.C., which is counter to local control over education, a concept that has broad bipartisan support. One of my top priorities in this body is to improve our education system, ensure that every child has an effective teacher in the classroom, improve accountability for all schools, and provide a pathway to college and career for lifelong success. And to be clear, the overall state of the schools in Washington, D.C. is a disgrace. A recent Education Week study showed a 48.8% on-time graduation rate. Frankly, we as Americans should be ashamed. We need to do better for the Americans who live here in Washington, D.C. And yet, it's absurd, Madam Speaker, that we as elected officials from 50 states are executing a right to determine how schools are funded in a jurisdiction that doesn't even have a vote in this body. I'm a representative of part of one state, Colorado, and yet here I am in a position of making school funding decisions on behalf of Washington, D.C. students. We wouldn't do this to Colorado or Ohio or Virginia or any other state. A district near mine in the state of Colorado, Douglas County School District, recently enacted a district-wide voucher program. The residents of D.C. are no less American than the residents of Douglas County. And yet in Douglas County, Colorado, there will be candidates that run for school board for the program, candidates that run for school board against the program, and the future of whether or not vouchers continue in Douglas County, Colorado will be decided where it should be by the residents of Douglas County, Colorado. This vote underscores the need for Washington, D.C. to control its own public school system as the state does. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I think Washington, D.C. should be a state. Until that day, Congress should respect the wishes of D.C. elected officials with regard to the administration of their education system. Now, I'd point out that there is a federal interest with regard to what the states do and what Washington, D.C. does with regard to education. States and the District of Columbia should have the discretion to make the changes they need to improve education, but not the discretion to stand back and do nothing. In fact, I worry considerably about a recent announcement by Mayor Gray that they would fund charter schools, capital for charter schools at only $2,800 per pupil, as opposed to the $5,800 that the conventional public schools get. I would ask for an additional 45 seconds, Mr. Hastings.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
I have an additional 45 seconds?
Yes, I'll yield the gentleman an additional 45 seconds.
I thank the gentleman.
Gentleman is recognized for 45 seconds.
If the elected officials and people of Washington, D.C. wanted a system of school vouchers, they would have created it and not relied on the federal government. The important moral imperative of education reform can occur with or without vouchers. And at this point in time, I think it's critical to give education reformers that are hard at work here in the District of Columbia a chance to succeed on the route that they have laid out, which apparently does not include vouchers at this time. I will continue to push for D.C. statehood and for a federal role that encourages transparency and accountability, improves and builds upon our successes in public education, and makes sure that we change what doesn't work with the tools and discretion at the local level to make those tough decisions. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Utah.
Again, Madam Speaker, I am pleased to be here and also be joined by my good friend from Colorado, whom I should probably publicly apologize for saying disparaging things last night when I screwed up, and I apologize for that. However, he presents to us an unusual conundrum that is here on who gets to decide on what will or will not be allowed. Whatever we do in this unique situation, decision will be made. If we pass the underlying bill, we empower parents in Washington, D.C. to make a choice. If we don't pass the underlying bill, we prohibit parents in Washington, D.C. from making that kind of choice. And once again, when they were allowed to make that choice, they had a waiting list for those wishing to participate. It's a conundrum. Whatever we do, yes or no, it makes a decision on behalf of the people of Washington, D.C. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman
Madam Speaker,
from Florida.
would you be so kind as to inform us as to the remaining time?
Gentleman from Florida has 16 3/4 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Utah has 17.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Florida.
I'm very pleased at this time to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, my good friend, Ms. Holmes Norton, who knows more about this issue than all of us combined.
Gentlelady from D.C. is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank you very much, and I certainly thank my good friend from Florida for his work on not only this bill, H.R. 471, but for his strong respect for the District of Columbia and its residents and his support for our right to self-government as American citizens. I oppose this rule, I oppose this bill, and at the appropriate time, I will have a substitute to redirect the funds in this bill in accordance with the home rule wishes of the District of Columbia. May I say, I appreciate the words of my good friend from Utah, but I do resent the use of the word liberty at a time when this bill would deprive the residents of the District of Columbia of the liberty every other district has in deciding local educational decisions for itself. They have it in Utah, and we will never be satisfied as long as we do not have each and everything you have in Utah. Now, the majority ought to approach this rule with caution. Many in the House ran on the promise to reduce the power of the federal government and to reduce the budget. Now we are 3 months into the new Congress, and if they vote for this rule, they will be breaking their promises. They will be voting
for an unprecedented expansion of the federal government's power in the quintessentially local decision of elementary and secondary education. They will be voting for this rule against the will of the jurisdiction, the only jurisdiction to which it applies, the District of Columbia. They will be voting for this rule with no consultation with any elected official in the local jurisdiction involved. They will be voting to authorize the federal government to mandate that a local government offer a program for students to attend private schools at public expense, federal expense, that is. They will be voting to increase the deficit by $300 million with no offset whatsoever for these funds, because this is a new program and their own protocols demand an offset for new programs. They will be voting, if they vote for this rule, the first test of their own legislative protocol of cut-go.
To complete her thought, I yield the gentlelady an additional 15 seconds.
The gentlelady is recognized for 15 seconds. 30 seconds.
So that in the first test of their legislative cut-go protocol, they will be voting to violate it. They will be voting to do so, $300 million added to the deficit at a time when they are cutting $11.6 billion with a B from education throughout the United States of America. We are American citizens and our reserve.
Gentlelady's time's expired. The gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I appreciate the opportunity of discussing this particular rule and the issues. There is one effect where the delegate from the District of Columbia does have something in common with the state of Utah. Over 70% of my land is owned by the federal government in Utah, and it's one of those factors that inhibits our ability to fund our educational system in the state of Utah. District of Columbia has that same initiative problem with so much of the land owned by the federal government. The difference, though, is that this program is giving federal money to the District of Columbia to fund not just this scholarship opportunity, but also increased funds to fund their charter school, as well as funds to fund the regular public education system. In that respect, I wish we were very similar to what's happening in the District of Columbia, but unfortunately we are not. I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
Gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Florida for yielding. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question so that we can address this important issue of currency manipulation and trade. Manufacturers in my home state of Rhode Island and those across the nation are working hard and playing by the rules, and they're suffering disproportionately because their Chinese counterparts refuse to play by the same set of rules in the global economy. One way Chinese businesses cheat is by keeping their currency artificially low so that their imports are cheaper than U.S. goods. That's simply not fair, and this practice must end. Artificially low Chinese currency contributes greatly to the global trade imbalance, which puts U.S. businesses and workers at a significant disadvantage. Chinese unfair currency manipulation has destroyed millions of good-paying American jobs and jeopardizes the future of the American middle class. Employment in manufacturing shrank from 20 million jobs in 1979 to fewer than 12 million jobs today. In Rhode Island, we experienced the loss of more than 30,000 manufacturing jobs in the last decade alone. Despite these sobering statistics, the American manufacturing sector is in the midst of a resurgence. If this vital economic engine is to be sustained, Congress must continue its investments in programs that help manufacturers compete in the global economy. ending currency manipulation, and by doing that we can level the playing field for American manufacturers, give them a fighting chance to compete and speed up our economic recovery and create jobs. With so many factories shuttered, small businesses barely hanging on, and Rhode Island workers continuing to look for jobs, we can't afford to wait any longer for the Chinese to correct their unfair trade practices. That's why I'm proud to co-sponsor this legislation to end China's unfair currency manipulation, because in states like Rhode Island, we have to fight back against countries like China that won't stick to their obligations under international agreements and play by the rules. If our country is going to compete in the global economy, we have to guarantee that manufacturers are not disadvantaged by an uneven playing field in foreign trade. We must demand that China play by the rules. I thank you, Madam Speaker.